Hey, Luca, good to see you. You're looking fine there, and thank you for coming on the show. Now, you are the creator of a platform called Amiable Arguments, and Twitter platform there is x.com/amiable argument. Could you just tell us, by way of introduction, what that's about?
Yeah, sure. So Amiable Arguments, I have to be kind to it, is the thing that got me into all of this in the first place. Because back then, this would have been about 2 years ago now, I was really sick of people losing their jobs and cancel culture over the most erroneous, inconsequential opinions, and people having their livelihood stripped away. And so I remember one evening I was going on one of my usual rants about it to my housemate, and he sort of said, "Well, why don't you do something about it, right? Rather than I keep getting the earful, but why don't you?" And so I did what any young lad in their 20s does in the 21st century and started a podcast, which is what constitutes doing something. But nonetheless, I don't really do that anymore, but it was still a wonderful avenue and means for me to learn how to argue, how to debate, how to listen to other people's points of views, and really just the beginning of putting my hat in the ring, as it were, and actually trying to put myself in the public domain and say, hey, here's a few things we should be intent on listening to.
Excellent. And I like the phrase you used there, putting your hat in the ring, because once you put your hat in the ring, there's no taking it out of the ring again, as it were.
No.
That's your you've staked your place now, and that's going to be with you forever.
Right. Well, that was another thing. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
With the amiable argument thing as well, that originally it was all about being anonymous, right? I was just going to be, I am Amiable Arguments, and yes, I'm Luca, but I'm sure there's 5 of them in the whole of the UK, so I might be able to stay under the radar a little bit. But really, it was eventually I came to the conclusion that actually, in order to really push, I need to entirely commit to this. I can't be half in, half out. I actually have to get on camera. I have to be willing to have these conversations as you see me now, and unashamedly stand up for what I believe in and what I believe millions of others in the UK believe in too.
Good. I'm so glad that you are doing that, because, to be frank, there is actually very few people who would do that, especially outside of the traditional party system, because the traditional party system gives you a certain protection. You can say, "Oh, I'm a Tory," or "I'm Labour," or SNP, and you can that protects you. Whereas if you're your own man, saying your own stuff, I mean, you can leave a trail behind you, of bodies, as it were, who tried to take you on and lost. And sometimes you won't get people rushing to your side. Whereas if you're like a Tory or Labour, you get all the Tory and Labour people rushing to your side. But if you're an independent person, which is the best way to be in many cases, then, it does require a strength of character, which you've obviously got. And I would encourage everybody who's watching tonight, we've got over 550 people, please go to x.com/amiable argument and do follow Luca. And he's also got a Substack there, Amiable Arguments, plural.substack.com. So, yeah, absolutely excellent. Now, you were on election night. You were on the Lotus Eaters, weren't you? Can you just tell us about what the Lotus Eaters are and how that went down?
Yeah, so the Lotus Eaters, for those who don't know, are an absolutely fantastic organization, online media platform based in Swindon, founded by a great mind called Carl Benjamin. And essentially they are, the best way I think I could describe it is they're a sanctuary for just thinking through traditionalist and more conservative ideas, and basically how to recraft and remake ideas so that we can better fight and preserve them in the 21st century against the globalist hegemon that's trying to take away any sense of people and place from basically British identities.
Well said, well said. And I don't want to upset anybody when I say this, but I think that the Conservative Party, as it exists at present, has been one of the prime movers of, in fact, facilitating what you've just talked about being against. And this is why I would be very, very upset if something like Reform tried to, we're going to join with the official Conservative Party, because the official Conservative Party is possibly left of the Liberal Democrats, really, at the end of the day. I mean, people up here, it's very funny because the national newspaper will try to make out like Rishi Sunak and that sort of lot were like literally goose stepping around London, checking where everybody lives and goodness knows what. I mean, that's the impression that they try to give, when in fact what you've got is just like a very, very soft Liberal, with no desire to even, as I say, peacefully defend the borders. I was thinking about this the other day. Britain stopped the slave trade, and we did it through the Royal Navy, and we sent ships off to West Africa to intercept boats off the coast of West Africa. And these were ships that are nowhere near what we've got today. And now what you're telling us, our nation, one of the greatest in the world, can't stop dinghies and won't return dinghies to France? Of course it can be done, and it can be done tomorrow. It's just that our political class doesn't want to do it and doesn't have the nerve to do it, because the media, which is also part of the globalist system and is a part of the lying globalist system, won't allow us to do it. I mean, would you agree with that analysis or not?
No, absolutely, I'd agree with it. The Conservative Party, frankly, deserved a worse kicking than it got in this election. I was actually very disappointed with the election result, because I'd been very much on board with the philosophy of the zero seats campaign, right? To get the Conservative Party as close to 0 seats as possible. And if not, next to 0, then at least kick them down to not being the opposition party, to put them lower than the Lib Dems, to basically take away what they feel is their divinely ordained mandate to be near or in power. But really, I think that the reason exactly why they did take the kicking that they did take, which was still a very brutal one, make no mistake, was the fact that really they have consistently, not just since Boris, although it has severely escalated since 2019, but consistently now ever since the Cameron years, and arguably before, if you want to go into the deep lore and history of it. But the Conservative Party has seemed to continually put every other country as priorities ahead of our own, and the safety of people in other places above our own. A particular anecdote of this I would actually quite like to share with you is that a few months ago, I went home and around the north of England. And in that time, I actually took myself on a bit of a trip to RAF Scampton, which is obviously you've got the Battle of Britain thing behind you, and Scampton and the Dam Busters was another pivotal moment from the British point of view in World War II. And under this Conservative government, they had decided that next to a village of 600 local residents, mostly retirees and children, they were going to put 2,000 illegal migrants on this heritage site, this airbase, with nothing more than a metal fence to protect the locals. And it's these sorts of little stories that you will find up and down the country which have pushed people over the edge and really just hate the Conservatives, rightly so, with every fibre of their being.
Yes, that's right. And now we've got Keir Starmer Now, everybody says that it's going to start getting worse now because of Keir Starmer, and it might well be correct. And he might just not care about that, because after all, he's got an awful lot of people in his party that, and he's also got a big ethnic minority support as well. And, you know, it's obviously some ethnic minorities do want to control immigration, but sometimes they don't necessarily have like the dog in the fight that some of the more indigenous people have. So he's what's going to be the force, the power, the leverage point that at least makes him think twice, and that perhaps makes him try to slow it down, or perhaps try to look at the situation, try to control it in some way. And the only leverage point I can see at the moment would be fear of losing votes to Reform, because Reform came second, as I mentioned earlier, in 89 seats, second to Labour. And so he has to be aware of that demographic, and he has to be aware, of that power. And in Scotland in 2026, we've got the elections coming up as well. And Reform was third in 14 constituencies and fourth in 30 constituencies. And it got 7% across the board in Scotland. It even got 5.7 average percent here in Glasgow, which, if that was translated into a regional vote for the regional MSPs in 2026, that would give a Reform candidate here in Glasgow. In fact, 7% across all of Scotland would probably give about 8 Reform candidates. And in 2026, on the regional list, there's no danger, there's no fear of voting for somebody and it's a wasted vote. I mean, people who, for example, this time around voted tactically for Labour, next time they can simply just vote for Reform, and their vote will count. It will count more, in fact. So fear of losing seats to Reform, fear of losing votes and support to Reform is one factor, one leverage point that we've got. We would not have anything if Reform had not performed very well at that last general election. But because Reform has performed well, there is a lever there that can be utilised, and I have every hope that Reform will absolutely exploit that, because they're really all that we've got at this present stage. What's your thoughts?
No, I totally agree. They are Reform are flawed, but they are also pragmatically the best that ordinary people have to work with right now. I think that, generally speaking, since Nigel has come back, there has been a genuinely electric ground campaign. I mean, frankly, if Tice was still the head of it, he just doesn't have the charisma and charm that Nigel has to, I think, push that. Like, I don't think Great Yarmouth would have come out with a shock sort of Reform win if Tice had still been in charge, because really, yes, although the Reform MP for Great Yarmouth is very good, as you were saying before I came on about voting, right? A lot of people now, they don't vote for their local MPs so much as they actually vote for either the party or the party leader. And so you can guarantee that a lot of people in there are voting Reform because they purely want Nigel to do well. And this is something that has been very much the case with Nigel since the UKIP days, which is that even back then, he was very much a one-man party. You weren't voting for UKIP, you were voting for Nigel Farage. And the challenge for Nigel now is to genuinely move on from that, although he will be very important, and actually make it where it's about the party itself, that people can get excited about lots of the candidates, that the messaging is good, consistent, and on point. And it was also interesting what you were saying earlier about Richard Tice saying, we want to be the anti-socialist party. It's like, well, it's not particularly strong framing, right? And this is the thing, that the Reform are really going to have to, they've got 5 years and they've got a good opportunity here to lay some really good groundwork. And if they play their cards right, they could do exceptionally well in 2029. But the messaging has got to be on point. And the fact of the matter is that with people like Tice, who will continually go out and say, hey, we're not racist, look at our minority candidates. It's like, Richard, you're not going to out diversity the Labour Party and the left, right? That's their game. You leave them to do that, right? This party needs to be about people and place, right? It's about the forgotten man and woman on the street who have had to sit by for as long as I've been alive, frankly. I'm 27, I was born in 96. So basically Blair has been in power and mass immigration has continued since I've been alive. For my entire lifetime, we've had mass immigration now, right? And those people have been dragged kicking and screaming by a regime that doesn't care about their opinions into a future they didn't want and didn't ask for. And it's really got to be the case that Nigel has to shift the rhetoric, as he's already doing, but like the whole party needs to flock to this position. It has to have message discipline, and it needs to say, no, this is about reclaiming the Anglo-centric identity of Britain and giving it paramount place above all others. And if you do that, then all of the internal logic of the rest of the policies will waterfall into place in a very natural and organic manner.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well said. And I'm so glad there's people like you around who are saying that, who are understanding that, and hopefully can feed in whatever ways that you do through your social media platforms and such, that precise message. And again, I encourage the 650 people watching now at x.com to go to /Amiable Argument and do follow Luca, because he's like quite a few people on the platform. They say, and we include ourselves in this, in the great wise minds of Twitter, we simply do not get the traction that we need and which we actually do deserve with our words of wisdom. So please do follow and engage with x.com /Amiable Argument. Yeah, no, well said. Do you have any thoughts on the electoral system as such? Now, what really struck me was that the Lib Dems got 3.5 million votes and 72 seats, was it? Let me just check.
Over 70, I'm pretty sure.
It was 72. It was 72 because the 72nd was not declared until Saturday, and that was in Scotland. And 3.5 million votes. UKIP got over 4 million. UKIP, interesting. Reform. I can't get my time with Nigel. I used to be a member of UKIP, and I was on the NEC with Nigel, so I know Nigel. Back in the day, but that was way back in the day. So I always think of, when I see him, I think of that party. But no, Reform got over 4 million votes and 5 seats. And that's really totally ridiculous. Now, obviously, I understand how it happens, because the British system is based on constituencies and constituency representation. And so there are 72 constituencies where there is where the Lib Dems can win first past the post. But on a national level, looked at not at the individual constituency, but looked at the national level, which is really the level that most of us think about things these days, UKIP should have got much more. And I was talking to somebody at the weekend about this, and they said there should be a form of proportional representation called a national list that somehow is able to divide the seats by the votes per party. However, the downside of that is you would lose a certain amount of local representation. But then again, how much representation to what extent do people vote to send somebody to Westminster to represent their local area? I mean, that's the ideal. That was how it started back when it was just like men only could vote, and they would send their best businessman down, or they'd elect him and send him down so he could look after their interests in the shipyards or wherever. I mean, are we doing that these days? Some of us might be doing that, but a lot of us are not. So, time has moved on, time has changed, and I think there is a case now for like a national PR system, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm actually in two minds about the changing of the way that the electoral system works, because on the one hand, the reason why first past the post does actually have its merits in that when it works, it creates strong government, right? It means that the party that gets the most votes tends to come out with an actual majority and the ability to implement, allegedly, the promises of its manifesto, right? Otherwise, you end up with the Danish option, the Dutch option, as you saw recently with Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, where he is actually the most voted for party, and they did get the most of the vote, and yet it's still not enough to actually become the main party in government, and he has to appease and create deals with a bunch of other smaller parties that didn't win. And that means that he has to, despite winning, he has to water down and tone down his commitments. So that's one thing that I'd say in favor of the first past the post system. But the other thing that I would say is that on the favor of PR is that you would never hear again the angle that you can't vote for this party, it's a wasted vote, right? You'd never hear that again, because all of a sudden, every single vote would matter, as exactly as you were saying about the upcoming elections in 2026 in Scotland, right? Those reform votes will actually count when people put them on the ballot. My only skepticism is that Reform are clearly playing to win in 2029, right? Nigel is going to go all the way. And, he's made it quite clear that he said, unquote, unless someone younger and more good looking comes along, then it will be him in 2029 and he could potentially be prime minister, right? But if Reform outright win the election in 2029, then they've beat the system under the rules of the old system. And so you therefore the skeptic in me has to ask the question, if you've beat the system once under first past the post, why is it then in your own interest to change it? Because as we've seen also, first past the post, it's a magnificent gatekeeper for keeping out smaller parties, which is exactly the reason why the Conservatives and Labour Party have defended it for so long, because it serves the interest of the biggest parties. And so I'm not saying that Reform wouldn't do it, but I am saying that the self-serving impetus for them to do it would disappear. And actually, it might be an act of vandalism for their own electoral security if they were to do it. So I think that's just something to think about.
That is very well said. That's very well said. It's definitely something to think about. And I think you've summarized the case for and against there extremely well. As far as big majorities creating strong governments, yes, they do. But then again, we've seen what a strong 80-seat majority did for Boris Johnson's government. He used it to lock the country down for 2 years, among many other sins. And who knows what this big majority that Starmer has got. What is it? It's 412 seats if you include the speaker. Very big. That's not the majority. That's the number of seats that he got. So it's a debate that will go on, but it's a debate I think that we should be having, and we should be looking at it, because I mean, would we be in this situation? Would we be in a situation where we have a Tory and Labour parties that are happy for the country to be invaded daily by hundreds of fighting age men? If, say, back in the 70s and 80s, we had brought in proportional representation, and there had been voices like you and I and others in Parliament arguing against it, would we be in this situation today now? I tend to think that this situation has come about as a consequence of these so-called strong governments simply ignoring the will of the people. But you make some good points there, and it's not a debate we're going to settle this evening, that's for sure.
I would actually just say, if I may, on that point, what you were saying about if we had had a different system in the 70s, would we have been able to prevent this? For what it's worth, and don't get me wrong, I wasn't even alive then, but for what it's worth, I don't think we could have prevented this, actually. I actually think that there was an inevitability to all of this through the post-war consensus and through the wheels that were set in motion after the fallout of World War II, that has essentially, and you can tell that this is the case because it's not just us that are dealing with these problems. It's France, it's Spain, it's Germany, it's Italy, it's Greece, right? It's Austria, it's Sweden, right? Ireland and Sweden weren't even combatants in World War II, and yet they've still had a lot of the things that we've had forced upon them against their will. And so I would just thought, not necessarily to you personally, but just to people listening, I would caution against falling into a trap of, well, if we'd have done this differently, because the fact of the matter is that this is the way it is, and the best countermeasure that we can make to remedy it is simply to put our own people with our own sensibilities and our own moral compasses into the positions of power, whether that be in Parliament, whether it be in our national institutions, whether it be in the education system, right? We just need to do our moral duty to our country and to our people, and whatever role in society you have. And if we all do that, then we can slowly start to turn the country around incrementally, even though in the halls of power under these next 4 years under a Labour government, they have their agenda. Let's have ours. Let's do the right thing and bide our time.
Very well said. Very well said indeed, Luca. And you're right, I think, that this has been a situation facing the entire Western world, and you can trace it back to the ideas that came out of World War II. You can trace it back, and we're living the sort of inevitable consequences of the ideas that came out and dominated as a consequence of the end of that period. I think that period is coming to an end now, and I think that new consciousness is being born in various ways, sometimes in the most unlikely areas, and sometimes as a consequence of the most unlikely things as well, that people are coming out and seeing that everything that we necessarily believed and which upheld and underpinned the orthodoxies of the day may have actually been built on shakier ground than hitherto imagined. But on that deep thought, which requires a lot more discussion, and which I'm sure we'll have in the coming months and years, let's draw this to an end. We're coming up to the top of the hour. Luca Johnston, it's been a pleasure. Once again, I recommend people go and check out your x.com/Amiable Argument, and also your Substack, which is Amiable Arguments.substack.com, and for some really good, in-depth, thoughtful, patriotic ideas. Luca, we definitely must have you on again this year. Whenever you've got something to say, just dial in and we'll arrange a date for you.
Thank you. It sounds like a lot of fun, and I hope that those people who are listening have found the conversation stimulating and engaging. So thank you for listening.
Yes, good stuff, Luca. Okay, we'll say good night. See you again.
Thank you.